think we're in massive trouble, frankly, with the Kamala administration, and that's my honest opinion. Kamala is moderate when she, in fact, is not moderate. And they certainly will not be intimidated by Kamala. And you have to really think of that in the context of global security.
Elon Musk sounds the alarm on what's at stake in the 2024 presidential race. With Biden's time in office under scrutiny, Musk dives into why Kamala Harris might not be the global force America needs.
I think people are not going to be, and they obviously have not been at all intimidated by Biden, and they certainly will not be intimidated by Kamala. And you have to really think of that in the context of global security. That if the American president is someone that, like, evil dictators are scared of, that makes a huge difference to the security of the world. I think it's just worth emphasizing, to listeners, the immense importance of whether the United States president is intimidating or not intimidating, and how much that matters to global security. Because there's some real tough characters out there, and if they don't think the American president is tough, they will do what they want to do. Obviously, what's happening sort of overnight is they're rewriting history and making Kamala sound like a moderate when in fact she is far left. Kamala is moderate when she in fact is not moderate. I think it's a massive. I think we're in massive trouble, frankly, with the Kamala administration, and that's my honest opinion. And I think really it's essential that you win for the good of the country this election. And I'm just stating my opinion. Now, you may have seen this, but I got a letter from the EU Commission, like saying, to not have disinformation on during this discussion that we're having, and there's a lot of attempts to do censorship and to force censorship even on Americans from other countries. And I think a lot of people thought the Biden administration would be a moderate administration, but it's not. And obviously that we're just going to see an even further left administration with Kamala. That's my honest opinion. Her dad is literally. She was brought up as an actual. Her dad is a Marxist economist. You can Google it. It's not we're not making this up. That's how she was brought up. So, and we want to have a future that is prosperous. And I think we're just at this critical juncture. And I think this is a case of the America is going to at a fork in the road, and
true.
And I think it will take the path, like you are the path to prosperity, and I think Kamala is the opposite. Then that's my honest opinion. I'm gonna get attacked like crazy, and I've also experienced quite a bit of lawfare myself, but I'm just trying to tell people my honest opinion, and I haven't been really active in politics before, and I'm just trying to point out that my track record historically has been moderate, if not moderate, slightly left, and so this is to people out there who are in the moderate camp to say, I think you should support Donald Trump for president, and I think it's actually a very important junction in the road, and we're in deep trouble if it goes the other way. Yeah, if I could summarize it, perhaps, I think these are issues that I think most people in America would agree with, which is that we want safe and clean cities, we want secure borders, we want sensible government spending, we want to restore both the perception and reality of respect in the judicial system, just stop the lawfare, and I think that's like, and how are those even right-wing positions? I think those are that's just common sense.
Kamala was the border czar. Now she's denying it. Everything that I do, she's saying she was strong on the border. We're going to be strong. Well, she doesn't have to say it. She could close it up right now. They could do things right now. It's horrible. No tax on tips, and all of a sudden she's making a speech and there will be no tax on tips. I said that months ago. And by the way, they had just the opposite. They had not only tax on tips, but they hired 88,000 IRS agents And many of them were assigned to go get waitresses and caddies and all of this on tips. They have a policy. They had a policy that they were really going to go after you and were really harassing people horribly.
Well, let's start with the fact that when Joe Biden and I came in office, during the height of a pandemic, we saw over 10 million jobs were lost. People, I mean, literally, we were all tracking the numbers. Hundreds of people a day were dying because of COVID. The economy had crashed. In large part, all of that because of mismanagement by Donald Trump of that crisis. When we came in, our highest priority was to do what we could to rescue America. And today, we know that we have inflation at under 3%. A lot of our policies have led to the reality that America recovered faster than any wealthy nation around the world. But you are right. Prices, in particular for groceries, are still too high. Prices have gone up. And families and individuals are dealing with the realities of that bread costs more, that gas costs more. And we have to understand what that means. That's about the cost of living going up. That's about having to stress and stretch limited resources. That's about a source of stress for families that is not only economic, but is on a daily level, something that is a heavy weight to carry. So it is something that we take very seriously. Very seriously. And we know from the history of this issue in the United States that when you see these prices go up, it has a direct impact on the quality of life for all people in our country. So it's a big issue, and we take it seriously. And it is a priority, therefore. So we have addressed it in a number of ways. One of the issues that we know is related to this is the supply chain issue that we just discussed. And so on a domestic level, in terms of domestic policy, one of the approaches we have taken is to work with labor unions and to work with municipalities in opening back up and extending the hours of our ports. There are actually three I have in mind: Los Angeles, Long Beach, and Savannah. And in fact, part of the infrastructure bill benefit is most recently what we will do to assist Savannah in broadening their ability to be an active port. And we've seen a reduction in the container ships off of the Long Beach and LA ports because of what we have done, which is to extend, as you know, to extend the hours to now 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But there is also a point that is important to make on the Build Back Better framework. One, it is designed to make it less expensive for working people to live. It was specifically designed to bring down the costs of childcare and increase accessibility and availability. Designed to bring down the cost of elder care and make it available to all those working families that need that support and need that help. And Build Back Better is not going to cost anything. We're paying for it. So when we can get Build Back Better passed, and we are optimistic that we will, the American people will see costs actually reduced around some of the most essential services that they need to take care of their basic responsibilities, including issues like childcare and elder care, and also preschool. And that's an important point to mention also. And in fact, I had some conversations here in France, including with the Minister of Education in France, about the, again, global impact of the pandemic on childcare, but also on education, and in particular for our youngest children. Universal pre-K, when we're able to do that, 3 and 4 years old, getting education at no cost, what that is going to do in terms of not only supporting working families who otherwise can't afford to put their kids in a private situation and otherwise don't have it available, that's going to have a huge impact on lowering the cost for families. So that is a big part of our agenda, and I think it's important to also stress that it's not going to cost anything for the American taxpayer.
Well, like I said, at a government level, I think that there should be a regulation removal department. And probably some, when we pass new laws, they should have some kind of sunset, perhaps, that they need to be reaffirmed before they are
or they expire. Now, I think it tends to happen is that once regulations are passed, that an ecosystem of consultants forms around those regulations that wants to keep them going. Environmental regulations are particularly bad in this regard. So, and I'm very much pro-environment, but the environmental regulations are, in my view, largely terrible, and they're very much sort of permission-based, as opposed to you have to get permission in advance, as opposed to, say, paying a penalty if you do something wrong, which I think would be much more effective. To say, like, look, we're going to do this project. If something goes wrong, then we'll be forced to pay a penalty, but we do not need to go through a 3 or 4 year environmental approval process. So just changing things from, you have to get a permission in advance to you have to pay a penalty if you do something bad, I think would be profoundly effective for the advancement of large projects. But just in general, I think governments around the world should be actively deleting regulations, questioning whether departments exist. Obviously, President Milei seems to be doing a fantastic job on this front, just deleting entire departments. Fantastic.
This election, I do strongly believe, is about two very different visions for our nation. One, ours, focused on the future, and the other, focused on the past. We see that contrast clearly in many ways, including when it comes to how we think about the economy. So our country has come a long way since President Biden and I took office. At that time, we sadly remember the millions of Americans that were out of work. We were facing one of the worst economic crises in modern history. And today, by virtually every measure, our economy is the strongest in the world. We have created 16 million new jobs. We've made historic investments in infrastructure, in chips manufacturing, in clean energy. And new numbers this week alone show that inflation is down under 3%. And as President of the United States, it will be my intention to build on the foundation of this progress. Still, we know that many Americans don't yet feel that progress in their daily lives. Costs are still too high. And on a deeper level, for too many people, no matter how much they work, it feels so hard to just be able to get ahead. As president, I will be laser focused on creating opportunities for the middle class that advance their economic security, stability, and dignity. Together, we will build what I call an opportunity economy. An economy where everyone can compete and have a real chance to succeed. Everyone, regardless of who they are or where they start, has an opportunity to build wealth for themselves and their children. And where we remove the barriers to opportunity, so anyone who wants to start a business or advance their career can access the tools and the resources that are necessary to do so. I will focus on cutting needless bureaucracy and unnecessary regulatory red tape, and encouraging innovative technologies while protecting consumers, and creating a stable business environment with consistent and transparent rules of the road. As president, I will bring together labor with small businesses and major companies to invest in America, to create good jobs, achieve broad-based growth, and ensure that America continues to define the future and lead the world.
Well, I think it is very important that Argentina succeed and that we give President Milei our full support. And my prediction is that unless President Milei is stopped in some way from taking the actions that he wants to take, that Argentina will have a massive growth in the economy, and there will be far more prosperity and optimism about the future than there has been perhaps in 100 years. Well, from everything I've read, he's making all the right moves. I would just encourage the people of Argentina to give him their full support, run this experiment, because clearly the policies of the past have not succeeded. We know that for a fact. So let us, I think, go boldly into the future. I hope the people of Argentina give him their full support, and I think it'll be a very exciting adventure, and I think it's going to work out really well.
We have absolutely no intention, nor do we have any plans to send combat troops into Israel or Gaza, period. A terrorist organization, Hamas, slaughtered hundreds of young people at a concert. By most estimates, at least 1,400 Israelis are dead. Israel, without any question, has a right to defend itself. That being said, it is very important that there be no conflation between Hamas and the Palestinians. The Palestinians deserve equal measures of safety and security, self-determination and dignity, and we have been very clear that the rules of war must be adhered to, and that there be humanitarian aid that flows. The middle class is one of America's greatest strengths. And to protect it, then, we must defend basic principles, such as your salary should be enough to provide you and your family with a good quality of life, such as after years of hard work, you should be able to retire with dignity. And you should be able to join a union if you choose. Building up the middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency, because I strongly believe when the middle class is strong, America is strong.
Another way to think of the government is like a corporation in the limit. It is the biggest corporation, and it is a monopoly, and one that can really only go bankrupt if the country goes bankrupt. So it doesn't have the sort of, commercial corporations, if they make bad products, fail to compete, then they will go bankrupt, and they should if they make bad products. Government is essentially a corporation in the limit, and since it is monopoly, and there's just you can think of like I think one way to think of economy is just in terms of feedback loops. And the feedback loop for government-provided services to be excellent is weak, because if you have a government monopoly for anything, you as a consumer have no alternatives. You have no means of, and I would sort of say, like you said, think of the Department of Motor Vehicles, like the DMV, and it's very inefficient. You wouldn't want the DMV to make cars. Yeah. And if you don't get good service from the government, what do you do? Who do you complain to? You just, competition breeds excellence, because two organizations or more organizations are fighting to make the end consumer happy, and one will gain market share if they do a better job than the other. So that's why we really want government to do the least.
So in the weeks to come, I will address in greater detail my plans to build an opportunity economy. And today, I will focus on one element that's on the minds of many Americans as they pay their bills at the kitchen table or walk the aisles of a grocery store. And that is lowering the cost of living. So every day across our nation, families talk about their plans for the future, their ambitions, their aspirations for themselves, for their children. And they talk about how they're going to be able to actually achieve them financially. Because look, the bills add up. Food, rent, gas, back to school clothes, prescription medication. After all that, for many families, there's not much left at the end of the month. I grew up in a middle-class household. For most of my childhood, we were renters. My mother saved for well over a decade to buy a home. I was a teenager when that day finally came, and I can remember so well how excited she was. I kind of understood what it meant, but we called her Mommy. Mommy was so excited, it just made us excited that she was so excited. Later in college, I worked at McDonald's to earn spending money. Well, some of the people I worked with were raising families on that paycheck. They worked second or even third jobs to pay rent and buy food. That only gets harder when the cost of living goes up. When I am elected president, I will make it a top priority to bring down costs and increase economic security for all Americans. As president, I will take on the high costs that matter most to most Americans, like the cost of food. We all know that prices went up during the pandemic when the supply chains shut down and failed. But our supply chains have now improved, and prices are still too high. A loaf of bread costs 50% more today than it did before the pandemic. Ground beef is up almost 50%. Many of the big food companies are seeing their highest profits in 2 decades. And while many grocery chains pass along these savings, others still aren't. Look, I know most businesses are creating jobs, contributing to our economy, and playing by the rules. But some are not. And that's just not right. And we need to take action when that is the case. Well, we've seen great trends, and if you look at where everything is headed, we do believe that the work that we have been doing to bring prices down, and it's an issue, so you're right to bring it up, but to bring the costs down of living is something that we are seeing success with. But it is taking time. It will take a bit of time, but we are seeing steady progress, and I think that's what's important. I can't put a date on it, but I can tell you that the trends are looking good. Whenever American families are struggling, that is not acceptable. And we're going to always work, and it's one of the biggest priorities. I'd really offer you, it's actually the highest priority of our administration to bring costs down and to ease up the burden on families in America, and in particular working families. As Attorney General in California, I went after companies that illegally increased prices, including wholesalers that inflated the price of prescription medication, and companies that conspired with competitors to keep prices of electronics high. I won more than $1 billion for consumers. My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules, and we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead. We will help the food industry become more competitive, because I believe competition is the lifeblood of our economy. More competition means lower prices for you and your families. Now compare what Donald Trump plans to do. He wants to impose what is, in effect, a national sales tax on everyday products and basic necessities that we import from other countries. That will devastate Americans. It will mean higher prices on just about every one of your daily needs. A Trump tax on gas, a Trump tax on food, a Trump tax on clothing, a Trump tax on over-the-counter medication. And you know, economists have done the math. Donald Trump's plan would cost a typical family $3,900 a year. At this moment, when everyday prices are too high, he will make them even higher. As president, I'll take on the issue of the cost of health care. As Attorney General, I took on insurance companies and Big Pharma and got them to lower their prices. And together with President Biden, we've gone even further. We capped the price of insulin at $35 a month, and the total cost of prescription drugs at $2,000 a year for seniors. We let Medicare negotiate lower drug prices for seniors. And just yesterday, we announced that we are lowering the price by up to 80% for 10 more life-saving drugs.
Yeah, well, for a platform like the X platform, formerly known as Twitter, there will be things that are said that are incorrect, but it provides an immediate feedback loop for correcting things that are wrong. So somebody says something, well, then another person can reply and rebut what that person's saying, and there can be just an ongoing sort of dialogue or argument and someone can read the whole thread and see, okay, this person said something, but somebody counteracted that. There was further rebuttals. There was more context added, and that will give them the best understanding of the situation, as compared to, say, a legacy news media article where you just have the opinion of the reporter, no rebuttal, no comments, no counter-argument. And very often what's printed in the press is completely false, and people don't know. But on a real-time interactive platform like X, they can see not just what somebody said, but what are the rebuttals, what are the counter-arguments. And we've got things like community notes, which I think is very helpful, where if somebody says something false or sort of inaccurate or misleading, then the sort of the core secret to community notes is that for a note to be attached to a post, people who normally disagree about a subject must agree on that community note for it to be shown. So the probability of it being accurate is very high, because people who historically disagree are only going to agree on something that is quite accurate.
And I pledge to continue this progress. I'll lower the cost of insulin and prescription drugs for everyone with your support, not only our seniors. And demand transparency from the middlemen who operate between Big Pharma and the insurance companies who use opaque practices to raise your drug prices and profit off your need for medicine. As for Donald Trump, well, he wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act, which 45 million Americans rely on. 45 million Americans rely on it for health care. That would take us back to a time when insurance companies could deny people with pre-existing conditions. We all remember what that was. He tried to cut Medicare every year he was president, threatening a program that tens of millions of seniors count on. And according to his Project 2025 agenda, he intends to undo our work to bring down prescription drugs, the cost of prescription drugs, and insulin costs. Well, we've come too far to let that happen.
You want somebody who's competent. That's helpful.
Yes, I think definitely somebody's executive ability is underrated. Since the president is effectively the chief executive officer of the country, it actually matters if they're a good executive officer.
Yeah.
It's not simply a matter of do they share your beliefs and But are they good at getting things done? There's a lot of decisions that need to be made every day. Many of them are unrelated to moral beliefs.
Right.
And you just want a good executive, because they're CEO of America.
They are.
So we want a good CEO of America. That in any given election, even if you try your hardest, if you've got 100 million votes, there's going to be some amount of fraud that is not zero. And that it's important to acknowledge that without saying that the fraud was of sufficient magnitude to change the outcome.
So now, the housing market can be complicated, but look, I'm not new to this issue. As State Attorney General, I drafted and helped pass a homeowner Bill of Rights, one of the first in America. And during the foreclosure crisis, I took on the big banks for predatory lending with many of my colleagues, including Roy Cooper, and won $20 billion for California families when I was Attorney General. And I know what home ownership means. It's more than a financial transaction. It's so much more than that. It's more than a house. Home ownership and what that means, it's a symbol of the pride that comes with hard work. It's financial security. It represents what you will be able to do for your children. There's a serious housing shortage. In many places, it's too difficult to build, and it's driving prices up. As president, I will work in partnership with industry to build the housing we need, both to rent and to buy. We will take down barriers and cut red tape, including at the state and local level.
What role do you think X will play in the 2024 U.S. elections?
Well, our goal is to be as even-handed and fair as possible. You know, whether someone is right, left, independent, whatever the case may be, that the platform is as fair and as much of a level playing field as possible. And now in the past, Twitter has not been, because Twitter was controlled by far-left activists, objectively. They would describe themselves as that. So if sometimes people are like, well, has it moved to the right? Well, it's moved to the center. So from the perspective of the far left, yes, it has moved to the right, because everything's to the right from the far left. But no one on the far left that I'm aware of has been suspended or, banned or de-amplified. But we're trying to be inclusive for the whole country and for other countries too. So there's a diversity of viewpoints, and free speech only matters if people you don't like are allowed to say things you don't like. Because if that's not the case, you don't have free speech, and it's only a matter of time before the censorship is turned upon you. So I think Donald Trump, I think he owns a big part of Truth Social. So if he does want to post on the X platform, we would allow that. We obviously must allow a presidential candidate to post on our platform. Well, the single biggest thing that is often actually not mentioned in history books, but Durant does mention it, is the birth rate. So, perhaps to some, a counterintuitive thing happens when civilizations become are winning for too long. The birth rate declines. It can often decline quite rapidly. We're seeing that throughout the world today. Currently, South Korea is I think maybe the lowest fertility rate, but there are many others that are close to it. It's 0.8, I think. If the birth rate doesn't decline further, South Korea will lose roughly 60% of its population. But every year that birth rate is dropping, and this is true through most of the world. I don't mean to single out South Korea; it's been happening throughout the world. So, as soon as any given civilization reaches a level of prosperity, the birth rate drops. And now you can go and look at the same thing happening in ancient Rome. So, Julius Caesar took note of this, I think, around 50-ish BC, and tried to pass, I don't know if he was successful, tried to pass a law to give an incentive for any Roman citizen that would have a third child. And I think Augustus was able to, well, he was, the dictator, so the Senate was just for show. I think he did pass a tax incentive for Roman citizens to have a third child, but those efforts were unsuccessful. Rome fell because the Romans stopped making Romans. That's actually the fundamental issue. And there were other things that there was they had quite a series of malaria epidemics and plagues and whatnot. But they had those before. It's just that the birth rate was far lower than the death rate. There's this hedonistic sex, which is that's neither here nor there.
Yeah.
It's
Not productive.
it doesn't produce kids. Well, what matters. I mean, Durant makes this very clear because he's looked at one civilization after another, and they all went through the same cycle. When the civilization was under stress, the birth rate was high. But as soon as there were no external enemies, or they had a extended period of prosperity, the birth rate inevitably dropped every time. I don't believe there's a single exception.
So that's like the foundation of it. You need to have people.
Yeah. I mean, it's at a base level,
Yeah.
no humans, no humanity. But at a basic level, if you do not at least maintain your numbers, if you're below replacement rate and that trend continues, you will eventually disappear. This is elementary. Now, then, obviously, you also want to try to avoid massive wars. If there's a global thermonuclear war, probably we're all toast. Radioactive toast. So we want to try to avoid those things. Then there are there's a thing that happens over time with any given civilization, which is that the laws and regulations accumulate, and if there's not some forcing function like a war to clean up the accumulation of laws and regulations, eventually everything becomes legal, and that's like the hardening of the arteries. Or a way to think of it is like being tied down by a million little strings, like Gulliver. You can't move. And it's not like any one of those strings is the issue. You got a million of them. So there has to be a sort of a garbage collection for laws and regulations, so that you don't keep accumulating laws and regulations to the point where you can't do anything. This is why we can't build a high-speed rail in America. It's illegal. That's the issue. The magic of community notes is it requires people who have historically disagreed in how they've rated notes. In order to write a note or rate, and you have to rate many notes. Mm-hmm. And so we actually do use AI here. So we populate a vector space around how somebody has rated notes in the past. So it's not as simple as left or right, because there are many more. Life is much more complex than left or right. So there's a bunch of correlations in how you rate community notes posts, community notes. So then, in order for a community note to actually be shown, people who historically have disagreed on a subject must agree in order for a note to be shown. That's the essential magic of it. That if people who in the past have disagreed agree about something, it's probably true. Wikipedia is very hierarchical, whereas community notes is inherently not. There is no hierarchy. And the acid test is, I can't change a community note if somebody put a gun to my head. And community notes has all the code is open source, 100%. All the data is open source, 100%. So you can completely recreate any note in the system independently. So if there was any interference, you'd notice immediately. I haven't endorsed anyone for president. I mean, I wanted to hear what Vivek had to say, because I think some of his things some of the things he says, I think are pretty solid. He's concerned about government overreach, about government control of information. The degree to which old Twitter was basically a sock puppet of the government was ridiculous. It seems to me that there's a very severe violation of the First Amendment in terms of how much government control, how much control the government had over old Twitter, and it no longer does. So there's a reason for the First Amendment. The reason for the First Amendment for freedom of speech is because the people that immigrated to this country came from places where there was not freedom of speech, and they were like, you know what, we got to make sure that that's constitutional, because where they came from, if they said something, they'd be put in prison, or they'd be,
something bad would happen to him. So, and freedom of speech, you have to say, when is it relevant? It's only relevant when someone you don't like can say something you don't like, or it has no meaning. And as soon as you sort of, throw in the towel and concede to censorship, it is only a matter of time before someone censors you. And that is why we have the First Amendment.
And by the end of my first term, we will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals. Because, some corporate landlords, some of them, buy dozens, if not hundreds of houses and apartments. Then they turn them around and rent them out at extremely high prices. And it can make it impossible then for regular people to be able to buy or even rent a home. Some corporate landlords collude with each other to set artificially high rental prices, often using algorithms in price-fixing software to do it. It's anti-competitive and it drives up costs. I will fight for a law that cracks down on these practices.
Consider fighting the woke mind virus, which I consider to be a civilizational threat. To be political, then yes.
So basically going into the battleground of politics. Is there a part of you that regrets that?
Yes, I don't know if this is necessarily sort of one candidate or another candidate, but it's I'm generally against things that are anti-meritocratic or where there's an attempt to suppress discussion, where even discussing a topic is, not allowed. The woke mind virus is communism rebranded. If the woke is left, then I suppose that would be true. But I'm not sure. I think there are aspects of the left that are good. I mean, if you're in favor of, the environment, if you want to have a positive future for humanity, if you believe in empathy for your fellow human beings, being kind and not cruel, whatever those values are. I would say that I would be probably left of center on social issues, probably a little bit right of center on economic issues.
And that still holds true.
Yes, but I think that's probably, half the country. Isn't that?
Maybe more.
Maybe more. It does seem as though civilization is reaching new heights in technology. And I think we've got quite a bit of momentum. I do worry about certain existential risks like the low birth rate, which is accelerating in most countries. And really, this is one of those things that I think is underrated as an issue, is that if there are no humans, there's no humanity. You have to make them somehow, and I think we should be very concerned about the accelerating implosion of the birth rate. This is a super big deal. Basically nothing else matters if there are no humans. As an initial premise, you must have humans for there to be civilization, unless we're going to leave it all to the robots. So this, I think, is massively underweighted. And I don't have a great solution to it, but it must be solved somehow, or humanity will dwindle to nothing.
When we took office, as many of you remember, our economy and the pandemic, well, things weren't looking good. In fact, in many ways heading in the wrong direction. But our administration worked with you to get our country back on track. We worked together to help millions of people who at the time were facing eviction to stay in their homes. We worked together to make sure families had enough food to eat. And because of our work together, since the President and I took office, we have seen record job creation, record declines in unemployment, and a record increase in labor participation. Together, we are heading in the right direction toward steady and stable growth. But while our economy has recovered faster than anyone thought possible, it is also a fact, as we all are living and know, that supply has struggled to keep up with the demand for new goods and products. The President and I are doing everything in our power to lower the cost of the things that matter most for American families, and that includes the work that we still, together, must fight to achieve, such as bringing down the costs of child care. We are to have a strong workforce. We must recognize that we must support working parents and their ability to parent. Every day around the world, the impact of the climate crisis is stark, and it is vivid. We are seeing it in real time. Here, of course, in Washington state, you have endured deadly heat waves and devastating wildfires. And across our nation, we see communities choked by drought, washed out by flood, and decimated by hurricanes. And of course, we are all praying for the people of Maui. Far too many lives lost. Far too many lives lost. Homes lost, businesses lost, livelihoods lost. And of course, we have to recognize and pay special attention to the Native Hawaiian community, which has seen some of their most sacred cultural sites destroyed. And so I will say that President Biden and I will continue to do all that we can to help the people of Hawaii, and both in terms of what they need now, but what they need in terms of recovery and what they will need to rebuild. So all of that to say, it is clear the clock is not just ticking, it is banging. And that is why 1 year ago, President Biden and I made the largest climate investment in America's history. And this work was designed to dramatically expand solar and wind energy production, to lower energy costs for working families, and to put millions of electric vehicles on the road, including thousands of electric school buses, so that, of course, our children can have clean air to breathe. And it is with these investments that we are clear. We are creating millions of good-paying, clean energy jobs. We are rebuilding America's manufacturing, and we are driving American innovation, something this state knows so well. In total, President Biden and I have committed nearly $1 trillion to build a thriving, clean energy economy for America. And I have seen, and Cameron mentioned this, I have seen our progress firsthand. I've been traveling our country, and for example, in April, I was in Dalton, Georgia. And so Dalton, Georgia is a factory town about 2 hours north of Atlanta, where for generations, good, stable manufacturing jobs supported thousands of working families. But then about a decade ago, those jobs started getting shipped overseas. And for years, of course, politicians have promised to reinvest in communities like Dalton to rebuild American manufacturing, but they never delivered. So President Biden and I decided that it is time to fix that, and we decided to dramatically expand clean energy production and to do it here in America.